What's up, everybody? Before we get into this, I've got a new video up over on my Static History channel. That's a little too spicy for here, so there's a link in my community tabs, or you can just type in Static History and it pops right up. I would rate that in the top 10% of videos that I've produced, so check it out if you want to. In my last video, I talked about how all of the old world false gods wanted sacrifices unto them, and then Yahweh comes along and he's the one true God, but he wants the same thing as all of the false gods, burnt animals. And I talked about how after studying all of this, it seems to me that they get their nourishment through the burning of these offerings. They're not necessarily of the same substance as us. And it seems like they somehow get their nutrition and sustenance from the smoke. Well, speculate no more, because I was listening to the story of Atrahasis last night, the Babylonian flood story, and Atrahasis is basically who we're calling Noah, apparently. He was a devout servant of Enki, and Enlil decrees to all of the gods that a great deluge is going to come and nobody is to tell the humans. Well, Enki comes up with literally the oldest workaround in the book, apparently, because Atrahasis is standing on the other side of a wall, and Enki walks up and says, "O wall, it has been decreed that a great deluge will come. So build a great boat and tar it with bitumen, and seal yourself inside with your family and all of the beasts that you can gather and all of the food that you can pack in there." So Enki didn't technically break the rule and tell the humans. He just told a wall, and Atrahasis just happened to be there and overheard it. All of the other gods had mixed feelings about this. You know, some of them wanted the humans annihilated, some of them didn't. But it kind of turns out to be a dumb move, because apparently they rely on the humans to feed them. Now, there is a note that this translation uses the name Enlil instead of Ellil. And if you think about that for a minute, why would they do that? And keep in mind, these tablets were just discovered like 180 years ago, and then just translated like 30 or 40 years ago. And I think they used the name Enlil instead of Ellil, because by adding the N in there, you create a bit of a buffer zone between these gods and the God of the Old Testament, because his oldest name was just El. You don't have to be a polyglot to figure out that El and Elil are probably just names of different cultures for the same God. And just like El sent the deluge in the Old Testament, Elil sent the deluge in the Babylonian epic. Now, there are some 500,000 clay tablets that have been discovered. And to our modern, sophisticated minds, writing on a clay tablet is just primitive and banal. But how many of our modern documents do you think they'll be discovering in 3,000 years? It's actually quite ingenious, especially considering Mesopotamia is mainly desert. They're just working with what they've got, but it is ingenious. I mean, they're still here. And they probably didn't make these with the intent of lasting through epochs. Now, this story is also carved into stone, and that they did mean to last for epochs. So as to the validity of this information, I don't think there's much wiggle room for fraud and forgery. So we're going to pick up the story right here in the post-flood world. She wept. She gave vent to her feelings. Nintu wept and fueled her passions. The gods wept with her for the country. She was sated with grief. She longed for beer in vain. Where she sat weeping, there the great gods sat too, but like sheep could only fill their windpipes with bleating. Thirsty as they were, their lips discharged only the rhyme of famine. For 7 days and 7 nights, the torrent, storm, and flood came on. Now, I'll probably do a video on this whole story at some time. I was actually rather enthralled in it last night, but I'll just give you a brief background that got us up to this point. First, the Anu, which are the top gods, had the Ajiji doing all of their mining work for them. And the Ajiji are also described as gods in this epic. Well, they got tired of doing all of the back-breaking work, and so they surrounded Enlil's house and complained about having to do all of their dirty work. So eventually they came to an agreement, and Enlil said, okay, well, you guys are going to have to pick out one of you guys to sacrifice, one of the Ajiji, which are still defined as gods, and we'll mix the sacrificed blood with clay and this hominin creature, which is probably like Neanderthal, and we'll make them do all the work. So they did this. They created the first humans, and then a few thousand years go by of this, and the humans get tired of doing all of the work, so then they have an uprising. What's crazy here is this is Mesopotamia, and they're doing all of this work along the banks of the Tigris and the Euphrates, and they mention locks being built and pathways to drag the boats back upstream, and archaeologists have found these pathways next to the rivers that they used to use to drag the boats back upstream. So these tablets that were just found 180 years ago are confirming what archaeologists today are finding. Hell, they probably read this and went and looked for it. But apparently when the gods removed themselves from the humans' presence in anticipation of this deluge, they didn't think about the fact that they had the humans making their beer for them, making all their, providing their food. So as thirsty as they were, they could only fill their windpipes with bleeding like sheep. Then there are about 58 lines missing, but I can kind of fill in the gaps of where we're at in this story. They're talking about Atrahasis getting out of his boat. And well, it's the exact same story that's told in the Old Testament. What did Noah do as soon as he got out of the boat on dry ground? He built an altar and sacrificed to God. From the Old Testament version, you would assume that he is sacrificing to Elil, who was the highest ranking god here, but he's also the one that sent the flood. It was Enki who gave the heads up. So you put two and two together, Atrahasis was most likely sacrificing to Enki and not to Elil. So to fill in the blanks here, he put down fire, provided food for Enki. The next line probably says he burnt a ram or something. The other gods smelt the fragrance, gathered like flies over the offering. When they had eaten the offering, Nintu got up and blamed them all. Whatever came over Anu, who makes the decisions. Now, Anu is the father of Enlil and Enki. He's the one that left Enlil in charge of Earth. Did Enlil dare to come for the smoke offering? Those two, who did not deliberate but sent the flood, gathered the people to catastrophe. You agreed the destruction. Now their bright faces are dark forever. So all of the gods smelled the smoke from this fire and gathered around like vultures to get them a little bit. Then it specifically says when they had eaten the offering. Well, what was the offering? It was an offering of smoke. So I think what I've speculated about for years now is 100% verified right here, that these old gods, they got their sustenance and nutrition through the smoke of burning animals. And these old world gods, including Yahweh, are not some eternal spirit beings. They are some type of physical being that requires sustenance. Now, I think all the writings make clear that they're not flesh and bone like humans, but as of right now, I think the Muslims' description of the jinn is most likely in my head. And they describe the jinn as being made of a smokeless fire. So they can't just take a bite out of a goat and chew it up and let their stomach acid process all the nutrients. It has to be burned and processed down fine enough that they can actually absorb the nutrition. So I just think that's an interesting aspect to the bigger picture of our history. And like I said, I've got an awesome new video up over on Static History if you guys want to go check it out, and I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.